Monday, the 19th of June, declare independence. Don't let them do that to you. Those are lyrics from a Björk song. But does an Icelandic pop princess who did too much E in the 90s and the noughties have anything to do with the Western Cape? We've got Jack Miller of the Cape Independence Party and Phil Craig of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group in studio to talk about this. Meanwhile, what happens in Poland stays in Poland, especially if you are on a flight with General Wally Rueda trying to make peace in Ukraine. Poland says that the detained plane was full of dangerous weapons. Insert your own joke about Peter du Toit from News 24 here. Tangentially, News 24 rated as the most trusted online news source in a Reuters media study 2023 among the least credible. Daily Maverick and Eyewitness News. Finally, here in the Western Cape, batten down the hatches, another storm approaching as dam levels hit 91.7%. It was 70% a week ago. In all of this, 73 drunk drivers arrested during the storms. You idiots, you fucking idiots. I'm Roscoe Palm. This is the Roscoe Palm Show. With me, I've got Nantle Hopley. Nantle, how was your Father's Day, bro?
Short. Couldn't really enjoy it that much, but it was good.
What did you get besides
a gown and pajamas? So it's a good year.
I think that's a good one. You know, I still owe my dad a bottle of whiskey. Okay. I told him it's pending, but we'll deal with that. So we've got we're talking about Cape Independence. Cape Independence, the process of the Western Cape or some version of the Western Cape becoming a fully fledged independent country. I'm going to say hi to Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Sorry, I keep tripping over that word. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, good, thank you. It's great to be with you, and you're far from the only person that trips over it, so don't worry. Cool. Yeah, it's good to be with you.
And Jack Miller from the Cape Independence Party. How are you doing, bro?
Roscoe, good to be back with you, friend. Yeah, very good.
This is the third time that we're meeting in person. The first time in 2013 was quite an adventure. Ended up with the late councillor Buddy Shaban taking a shotgun, bringing a shotgun into a meeting.
I didn't think we'd admit that on live air, but yes, that's the truth.
It was a fun night.
It was a fun night.
Yeah. So then, look, we're here to talk about Cape Independence. I want to talk about, what do you mean, Jack, when you mean independence, Cape Independence?
Well, look, I think independence and self-determination, it covers a vast spectrum. And one thing that... I know that you're on the fence with us, so I think I'd like to...
I'm on the other side of the fence, just so you know.
Okay, so that's why, I'd like to address it from that perspective, because you get people who support Cape Independence because they understand all of the reasons why we're doing this. But then you get people that do not believe that Cape Independence is the solution. And I would like to answer those people to say that even if you do not believe in Cape Independence, you should be a supporter of Cape Independence, because there is nothing in the political spectrum that exists today that can hold the national government to account better than Cape Independence. So this, as a result of pushing for Cape Independence, you can have people who believe in federalism or decentralization going, okay, fine, Cape Independence might be a step too far, but we're in favor of devolution or federalism or whatever it might be. And independence is ultimately the final, it's the final stepping stone towards bringing an end to the dictatorial control that we here in the Western Cape have suffered for almost 30 years under the ANC. And for those people who, as I mentioned, don't believe that Cape Independence is the ultimate solution, simply by putting that card on the table, we open up negotiations with a national government that has taken us for granted and oppressed the Western Cape for 3 decades.
Phil, let's come to you. So you are from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. I got that word out.
And you can we shorten that to the CIAG, which is much easier.
The first 3 letters. Some people would say that in fact you guys are tied to the first 3 letters, but let's park that maybe for now. So what is the difference between the Cape Independence Party and the Cape Independence Advocacy Group?
Okay, so we're an advocacy group or a lobby group or a political pressure group, whatever you want to call it. So So obviously we're not a political party. A political party will have policy positions which it'll then advocate and ask people to vote for. We are effectively a pressure group. We promoting the idea of Cape independence, and then we're trying to apply political pressure to a range of political parties to progress the idea. And we talk to most of the political parties in the political space, but obviously our primary focus is on the DA as the government of the Western Cape, and the only people who are actually capable of calling a referendum at this point in time, which is the sort of the key element, the central step to Cape independence, is having a referendum to decide if the people of the Western Cape want it or they don't. And I think we, as Democrats, we may differ on what we want the outcome of that vote to be, but I hope, as most Democrats would accept, that it's a decision for the people to make. You hold the referendum free and fairly, and you accept the outcome.
Is it accurate to say that the CIAG lobby politicians and orient this thing towards a program of action? Or how would you describe what you do?
No, absolutely. So there's been various phases. So I would say we probably would be in our third phase. Our organisation is about 3 years old. The first phase of our organisation really was to try and get Cape independence much more onto the political agenda, and I think you've seen that happen. So I think there wasn't a lot of media coverage about Cape independence. So our first step, we did two things. We got it into the media. I think in 2019, the year before we were established, there was 4 articles on Cape independence. 2020, there was 53, and we wrote 26 of them, and then that instigated people to respond, and now all of a sudden people were talking about this idea. And at the same time, we went out of our way and we forced political parties to talk about Cape independence. We went after the DA, we made them talk about it. We went after the ANC, we made them talk about it. Julius Malema ended up talking about it at his conference. So we actually put it on the agenda to say, look, here's an idea. If you don't like it, great. If you do like it, even better. But come talk about Cape independence. So that was the first, and that was very, very successful. Then that kind of ran up to the 2021 local government elections. Then there was a bit of a reset, all of a sudden, because for the first time, the ANC fell under 50%, and a lot of people thought, oh gosh, South Africa's been saved. If you look behind the facts, that was never the case. The ANC is the symptom of the problem. It's not actually the problem, and I accept we may differ on that. But actually, the ANC didn't elect itself. It's elected free and fairly. And the fundamental issue behind Cape independence is that the majority of Western Cape voters have never in 3 decades ever voted for the national governments. The people of the Western Cape aren't governed by the government they elect. And actually, statistically, it doesn't really matter who we vote for in the Western Cape, because the outcome is determined in the rest of the country. And that's the fundamental issue behind Cape independence. That actually we should be governed by whoever it is we vote for, and even if we might not agree on who that should be, we can agree that it should be our decision. So really, in that second phase, we then said, okay, well, how do we work in this space? And we instigated the Western Cape Devolution Working Group, which was with a number of groups: the DA, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, AfriForum, Cape Forum, Cape Independence Party, and academics and so on. And we said, look, okay, let's look at self-determination. So Cape independence is absolutely, in my view, the right outcome. But self-determination, there are other aspects, and we know from our polling that 75% of people in the Western Cape support increased autonomy, and they might disagree on what that should be. So therefore, in the second chapter, we then said, right, well, let's get everybody together. Let's form this devolution working group, and let's start working towards self-determination, even if we may disagree on what that self-determination is. And that's probably been the next chapter. And then now we're just entering the third chapter, and that's led up to 3 crucial pieces of legislation, which we are involved in all of them. And those 3 pieces of legislation are the referendum bill, which was tabled last week in the National Parliament. That will give life to the Premier's right to call a referendum. And then there are 2 other bills that have been tabled in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament, the Western Cape People's Bill and the Western Cape Provincial Powers Bill. And the People's Bill was tabled by the Freedom Front Plus, or was going to be. I think it's tabled on Thursday. And the Powers Bill has been tabled by the DA. And those 2 bills are pieces of sister legislation, and they will. One of them, the Powers Bill, will force the Western Cape government to seek more power in terms of devolved powers, policing, railways, and so on. And the People's Bill will claim self-determination for the people of the Western Cape within the South African state, I have to say. So that's not an independence bill, but that's a bill that allows the Western Cape people to make decisions for themselves. And with the referendum bill, now you have three very, very powerful pieces of legislation, and that turns the whole constitutional order of South Africa on its head. South Africa at this point in time, or the Western Cape, is a Rizla paper away, a cigarette paper away from federalism. And people, and in many ways that's happened without people noticing. But that era is about to come, and I think that's going to be good for the Western Cape, but it's going to be really good for the rest of South Africa too, because we're going into these elections in 2024, and the very likely outcome is that we're going to have a national government which is probably going to be ANC led, but we're going to have at least 2 provinces, and quite possibly 3, that are led by opposition parties. And I think the people, and that which will be the Western Cape, Gauteng, and potentially KZN, and that is going to open up the possibility for those other provinces to also want to have more control over their affairs, because the voters in Gauteng suddenly will not be being represented at a national government level by the people they voted for.
Okay, that's a good overview of more or less what you involved in. I'm going to dig into that a little bit further. I've just lost sound in the phones. Check that. So but Jack, on the website, and I think we can leave this up for a little while. This is your the website of your of the Cape Independence Party. It says, we are being economically destroyed. We are being culturally and ethnically and culturally oppressed. Can you just unpack those 2 things for me? What do you mean by economically destroyed and ethnically and culturally oppressed? And who is we in this?
Sure, absolutely. So let me start with the ethnic and the cultural oppression. In 1994, we were promised a dream of a rainbow nation. And I, like many others in the Cape, believed in that dream and hoped that Nelson Mandela's vision was something that we were going to actually get. In 2007, it became very clear to us that we were sold a lie, and the ANC was hell-bent on restructuring South Africa down racial lines, exactly like the apartheid government did, simply changing the shade of the people that they oppressed. And if you look at the recent Employment Equity Act numbers which came out, they're absolutely unbelievable. How in the 21st century we can accept policies which discriminate against people based on skin color like this is beyond me. So we believe in equality. We don't believe that there should be racial distinctions. And so in an independent Cape, we would throw out any policies like Employment Equity Act or things like that. And, people should be judged on their character, not on their skin color. So that's where we are deeply opposed to the ANC, as we were opposed to the preceding government, the apartheid government. And we need to start history as far as the Union of South Africa is concerned. In 1910, when the British Empire, through crusade, conquest, defeated the Boers in the Boer War. Many people refer to that as the first stages of, or the first concentration camps. And we were imposed upon us by the British Empire a colonial construct called the Union of South Africa. South Africa is not a national construct. No ethnic groups besides whites were allowed to vote for the Union of South Africa in 1910. So how can you even say that South Africa is a democratically legitimate construction? So from an ethnic and cultural point of view, we believe, not just for the Cape, but I mean for many of the parts of South Africa that are trapped in this colonial construct, to pursue their own self-determination and their own destiny as they see best fit for their community and their culture. And
but
so
if
that's
you're
the first
talking about
point.
a construct of the Western Cape is a construct from 1994, and this is where I want to define the Cape. What do you mean by when you talk about the Cape? Because I hear you talking about the Western Cape, and you're imbuing it with some sort of authority that the Western Cape, those lines that were drawn as part of a negotiation between the apartheid government and the, I would say, a very shackled ANC. Had to accept a lot of these things. So, what Cape secedes from South Africa?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We're bound by the South African Constitution. We're bound by the laws of this country, and currently the Cape constitutes the Western Cape. However,
why not the Eastern Cape? Because you said you're going back to the Boer War, and you're saying it like that these things are merely a construct. So I think you're trying to have it both ways.
No. So oppression is something that goes back to the Boer War. And well, I mean, there's a long history here. So when we talk about the Cape currently constitutes the Western Cape. This is where we're contesting primarily our elections for Cape independence. However, we don't believe in dictatorships. We believe that democracy should ultimately prevail. And if there are people in the Eastern Cape, people in the Northern Cape that would want to secede from the ANC-controlled national government and form part of a broader independent Cape country, they'd be welcome to. They should be granted those democratic rights. It's simply will of the people. So we choose the Western Cape because that is the political construct we find ourselves in. But it absolutely could include other parts of the country, which, as Phil mentioned earlier, do not historically vote for the ANC government, yet are forced to live under ANC rule.
So that comes to the nub of the thing, because I saw an interview with, I think you and, who's that, the Biz News guy, Ali Cog, where you said that this project began in 1996, and you tell the story about your father and you growing up in this household where succession and this debate was live. So what if I told you that, this thing, it's not about what you said earlier about 2007, we noticed this thing going left. From 1996, where this project started already, this was always the intention, even in the golden era of the Rainbow Nation, where we were lifting World Cups and African Nations Cups, when the Rainbow Nation was live. So how can it be that like the Western Cape...
Even prior to that, in 1993, you had the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, you had Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi pushing for a federalist system. In fact, the Zulus... There were definitely factions amongst the Zulus that wanted KZN to be an independent country. And so we believe from the beginning that federalism or a decentralized system or independent states would have been the best solution. However, the ANC promised us a dream of a rainbow nation. And because the IFP, as well as the Progressive Federal Party, which was sidelined in those negotiations, and in essence, you had the apartheid government and the new apartheid government in the form of the ANC meeting alone to decide the future of the country. All of these groups had no choice. My father's organization had no choice. Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi had no choice. Helen Suzman had no choice. All of these groups had no choice. We were forced a political construct that was decided between the apartheid government and the new apartheid government in the form of the ANC. So we hoped that what had been shoved down our gullets was the truth. We hoped that we were going to get a rainbow nation, but by 2007, it was very clear that we definitely should have gone Cape independence in those earlier years, or a federal system in those earlier years. And I think many people across the country realized that things were beginning to unravel. And now here we are in 2023, and where Cape independence was considered very extreme and a crazy idea back in 2007. You can't say that today. It doesn't matter who you are, even if you don't believe in outright Cape independence, people realize that the failings of the national government are so severe. They're looking at the future of their children, the future of their grandchildren. They're going, I don't know if we can survive in a country that's going this direction. Education is in absolute shambles. We don't have electricity to keep the lights on. Companies are collapsing left, right, and center. We've got racial policies across the board. This is not a rainbow nation. So we saw the writing on the wall in 2007. That's why we started the Cape Independence Party. And now I think more than ever, Cape Independence, or at least forcing the national government to open up itself to decentralization, is the only solution to get us out this mess.
But not the Eastern Cape. Because you're willing to accept one construct, as you put it, of the democratic dispensation, which is the borders of the Western Cape, which is, let's face, a majority white and Cape colored people. But Okay, you understand my problem that I'm having with this. It's the exclusion of black people from this project.
Why do you say that?
Because the historical borders of the Cape Province was mainly, it was the Eastern Cape, the Northern Cape, and what's now the Western Cape.
Well, you must have a problem with the Rainbow Nation then, because the Western Cape is the true Rainbow Nation. We are the most ethnically diverse. All the other provinces are far less ethnically diverse. 80-90% of one ethnic group. Here in the Western Cape, we are the true Rainbow Nation. If you want to have a mixture of different cultures and peoples, this is it. It's the Cape. And this is something that going back to 1910 has always been the case here. You know, it was the apartheid government's worst policies were outside of the Cape. And as many failings as we've had throughout history, the Cape has always been a far more open, liberal, culturally accepting part of South Africa and part of the world, and I think we want to protect those traditions and protect the people of the Cape, whatever their skin color may be. We have a culture here that goes back many hundreds of years, way back to the Khoisan, and there's a lot to be proud of. And the ANC is decimating that. They won't even acknowledge the Khoisan as the First Nations people. So, you know, as soon as they do, their whole land redistribution and land seizures fall through the floor, because then they've got to put their racist policies aside and go, well, then the Khoisan need to take all the land all the way up to Zimbabwe. So, you know, it's ridiculous that we're having to live under these types of policies from the ANC. So I think I've answered quite substantially that first part, which is what we're trying to fight against, ethnic and culture. So let me move on to the first part, which was about the economic destruction of the Cape. And this is one of the most important parts of Cape independence, or other forms of self-determination, is that we in the Western Cape pay approximately 250 billion rand in taxes to the national government on an annual basis. We get back approximately 50 billion rand on an annual basis. If we were an independent country, we could cut taxes in half and still have double the amount of resources for schools, for hospitals.
I
for
will get to the
infrastructure.
economic arguments for Phil. I see you in your seat. I think Nantel, you had a question, and then
Sure.
So my question is: so you're mentioning the people of color, right? And you're mentioning that the ANC. The BE is not working and stuff like that. You'll abolish that. So my question is, since that the people of color is the majority of the Western Cape, how will your idea incorporate and rectify the injustice of apartheid? Because if you look at the state of the Cape Flats, and you look at the state of the Constantia and all that, it's two different worlds. So if yeah, that's the one question. And the second question, I had I think it's almost 2 years ago, I had an interview with George Williams and Craig Carlson. Yeah, from the Good Hope Country. That's the last name that they had. So they are a group that also wants independence, but they say that they are the indigenous people. And they went to the UN. So how do they want the same thing, but how do they fit into your plan really?
I think we're all a happy family here in the Cape. I think everyone fits in, and so you know you've got people. There's a broad spectrum of people that believe in Cape independence, and as Phil has said, you know, it takes a number of different people to build a house. And you know, everyone needs to play their part and play their role. So I'm not familiar with this group that you're referring to. But yeah, we're a broad family, and we support anyone that realizes that this system is failing under the ANC, and we need to try and change it. And I think many people see Cape independence as the solution, and many people in the colored community, because you're absolutely right. The colored community, you know, under the apartheid government, coloreds were second-class citizens, and many of our members in Mitchell's Plain and Delft and Lavender Hill, etc., you know, the colored community says we were second-class citizens under apartheid, we're third-class citizens under the ANC. So I think what we need to do is, first of all, recognize the history of South Africa, the Khoisan people, We had a very strong functioning apprenticeship program where kids would graduate at 18 with skills that they can actually use to take them out into the workplace. Now you got kids graduating at 18, a matric that means nothing. They can't get a job. They're not economically functional. And so we need to bring back these types of community building programs which result in economic growth. And as a result of economic growth, you get communities building there. One mustn't be reliant on government for handouts. This is another thing. And not only have the coloured community been sidelined by the ANC government, but many coloured communities who traditionally have been in the fishing industry or in various different in the textile industry. What you've seen is the ANC government has come in and taken the licenses for fishing away from these communities and given it to these BEE consortiums and absolutely wrecked many coloured communities across the Western Cape. So when you start to restore justice and put an end to the types of persecution that the coloured community have suffered under the ANC, I think you're going to start to see communities become stronger, build their own schools. In many cases, you've got people that don't speak Afrikaans, who are teachers at coloured schools, and the kids struggle to understand what the teachers are saying because they need to meet demographic guidelines that the ANC imposes on them. You've got people that have never fished a day in their life, which control and own the boats, which do all the fishing here in the Cape waters. These are absolute injustices that we would put an end to. And I think you'd see, just like Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, he didn't try to erase history. He didn't change the street names of the British Empire that had imposed themselves on Singapore for so many years. What he did is he started from a fresh slate and he put race politics behind. He put a focus on good political policies, good economic policies. And what you've seen now from 1965 onwards, Lee Kuan Yew took a muddied island and turned it into one of the prosperous...
Of 728 square kilometers.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's tiny.
Yes, absolutely.
You can do that things at that scale.
So you're telling me it gets better the smaller it gets?
Yeah.
Well, then let's go smaller then. Let's make Hart Bay independent. Let's make Zikufle independent. I agree with you. I agree with you, brother. Let's do it. So you are saying, you're admitting there.
I'm not admitting.
So
I'm saying it's easy to do these things at small scale.
Can take a 700-kilometer plot of land and make it as successful as it is, we've got 1,000 times more land than Singapore does. And if Lee Kuan Yew can do it with that small little patch of land, let me assure you, we can do amazing things with this beautiful Cape.
You know that in 2019, Singapore's economy overtook South Africa's economy in size.
No, absolutely. So I understand that. But I don't want to live in a right-wing country like Singapore. And I don't want to live in what I think appears to be a right-wing country of the independent, hypothetical Western Cape.
It would never be that. Absolutely not. I mean, like you just admitted yourself, well, you actually didn't admit this. You're saying that it's exclusive of ethnicities, but like I said, the Western Cape is the true rainbow nation.
Well, okay, we can split hairs about that and just agree to disagree about that. And
facts are facts. Facts are facts. We are the most ethnically diverse part of South Africa.
A disproportionate number of white people. Let's be clear that this thing was constructed for a particular reason, for a particular political outcome, and to an extent, the ANC's hands were tied about accepting certain terms of the constitution. And
no, what are you talking about? The ANC, the constitution was put in place in 1996. The ANC won the election in 1994. The ANC wrote the constitution on a silver platter. The ANC gave us exactly what they wanted.
Well, there was a lot of negotiation. The government of national unity, the borders of what is currently the Western Cape, is something that was particularly put out so that this is not a bug. This is a feature, But look, I want to talk about these other movements, these other areas that not just the Cape independence. Let's talk about other places that are seeking succession. Where are these areas and what's driving this vein of successionism?
Well, in South Africa or globally?
In South Africa.
Yeah. Look, I think the Western Cape is the most advanced one. I think what you're likely to see is other movements coming. Look, South Africa is an artificial construct. You've got all these people forced together. And what you were starting to see now is we're now entering this coalition era where somehow we've got to find a joint settlement. And the reality is, and this is a discussion interestingly that I had with the DA recently, because their argument that we were debating some of these topics. And their argument was, look, hang on a second, because in 2024, we may well be in government in 3 provinces. And I said, yeah, but just stop and think about what those 3 governments are going to look like. You're going to have a Western Cape government that is run predominantly by ethnic minorities who are against race-based policy and who are predominantly, I can't say free marketeers, social marketeers. You're going to come to Gauteng, where you're going to have a predominantly black government that is pro-business, but probably in favour of race-based policy. It's going to have a very different character to the thing. And when you go to KZN, you're going to have a tribal government. And you are going to be in government. You're going to be the dominant party in the Western Cape. You're going to be a major party in Gauteng. You're going to be the second party in KZN, and not the second party of government. But those three people, and we've done work with the Zulu independence movement. Now, what's interesting is what do we believe? So I think I said to you in the warm up, we're not particularly policy based. We believe in 2 things: democracy, non-racialism. And after that, if the Western Cape adopts a left-wing government, that's its choice. If it adopts a right-wing government, that's its choice. The important thing is it must be its choice. But when we start to talk about what I would favour, and probably most of our supporters, and you'd be quite right, so most of our supporters would be orientated towards freer markets and vehemently against race-based policy, now and would probably be Western orientated. I mean, the Western Cape has a more Western character. It's not Western, but it has a more Western character than the rest of South Africa. Now, when you talk to the Zulu nationalists, they want a stronger monarchy. They want a stronger role for traditional courts and their traditional justice systems. And actually, it's a very different society. Now, for me, the argument would be, well, the people of KZN should be governed according to the way that the people of KZN want to be governed, and the people of the Western Cape should be governed according to the people of the Western Cape, the people of Gauteng likewise. And why must we find some compromise that nobody's happy with, when actually, now whether that's, and the system comes secondary. And it was interesting listening to sort of Jack, because there are a few things, I agree with Jack on a lot of issues, I disagree with him on others, and I think as I was talking to you, what's the essence of all of this? Well, first of all, the essence of all of this is all people have the right to self-determination. That's the law. That's international law, which means that, and how do you sum that up, is people can't be trapped as helpless passengers on somebody else's ship. They couldn't in the apartheid era, they couldn't during the...
Aren't you anti-majoritarian then? You rejecting this thing of democracy by saying, well, I didn't score the goal, so I'm taking my ball home.
Well, I think you have to draw a distinction between, did you just have a bad result? So in other words, in a healthy democracy, the government changes on a fairly regular basis as good performance is rewarded, bad performance is punished. So therefore, that would be the case. If all of a sudden, the DA were elected to the national government and we was, okay, look, South Africa's all right, and then suddenly the ANC get elected, South Africa's all wrong, then you'd absolutely have a point. But that's not the case. You have to. What do the statistics say in the Western Cape? The statistics in the Western Cape say that the majority of Western Cape voters have never once been governed by the party they vote for. It's not a question of, well, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. The Western Cape always loses. And the most scary statistic is, if since 1994, I'll use the DA as an example because it's easy to visualise, if every single voter in the Western Cape, every single registered voter, 100% in every election voted for the DA, they would have still never been governed by the DA. So effectively, you've got, and people say, well, look, we don't need Cape independence. If you don't want the national government, just vote it out. And the answer is, but we can't vote it out. We've been trying to vote it out for 30 years. We actually can't. So therefore, we haven't got functional. So I think there's a difference between saying, well, look, the ebb and flow of democracy, and I would agree with you at that point. But there comes a point in time where you just have to recognise that one part of the country wants one thing, the other part of the country wants something else. And really, what is the harm in allowing both parts of the country what they want? Why does it matter to somebody in Gauteng whether the Western Cape is under their control or not?
Well, Jack said it, because the Western Cape contributes 250 billion rand to the fiscus. Why should we let you go?
So, well, okay, well, that would depend. Whose choice is it? The choice belongs to the people of the Western Cape.
No, it doesn't. It belongs to South Africa.
But it doesn't. International law is quite clear on that. And if you want to understand that, you go and see. So, for example, there's been in the last 3 decades, there's been 35 independence referendums around the world. And in every single situation, the seceding territory votes, not the whole country. And in fact, if you go to look at one of the issues at the heart of the Ukraine war, is Section 73 of the Ukrainian Constitution. And it was one of the key issues of the 2 Minsk agreements. And what was the issue? That Ukraine passed a law in its constitution that said if we're going to have a referendum on territory, all of Ukraine must vote. And actually, because that's in contravention of international law, norms certainly, law I think, a grey area, international law is very grey, is that was one of the key issues that all parties agreed, well, you have to change that in your constitution. So, and people in the Western Cape can't remain forever trapped. And I think you're where I would disagree with some of the conversation we've had so far. I don't think the history of South Africa is that relevant. And I think I'm not saying that dismissively, because I think there's a lot of terrible things happened. What I'm saying is, quite rightly, you asked the question, well, what about the people of colour in the Western Cape? And I think that's an absolutely valid question to ask. And I think the key question is not, because what we must avoid is a situation, well, first of all, you had the British, and then the Afrikaners got in and they punished the British. Then the ANC got in and they punished the Afrikaners. Now what happens when we vote out the ANC? Do we start reversing? At some point, we can't forever have this backward-looking policy. The bottom line is, and we centre ourselves on the wrong thing. We should centre ourselves on our country is deeply unjust. I think we can agree with that. We've got growth. We're the most unequal country in the world. We've got desperate poverty. We've got one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. So we've got real problems. So the question is not, how did we get here? Or whose fault was it 50 years ago? Or what did your great-grandfather do to my great-grandfather? The question is, how do we get that guy who's living in a shack into a decent house and into a job, and how do we fix these problems? And actually, moving forward, that's the issue. That should be the focus. How do we make ordinary people's lives better? Your dead ancestors are still dead. We're not going to be able to help them, but we can help your children and their descendants, and we can create a fair society for them. And that should be the challenge for me. The challenge of Cape Independence is, well, what's it going to be like in 20 or 30 years? Is it going to be a better society for the people of the Western Cape if we have independence now, or are the people of the Western Cape going to actually be better off if they remain in South Africa? And I would say absolutely, unequivocally, and ironically, so do they, because we've polled it, that the people of the Western Cape believe they would be better off, a clear majority, and actually all of the evidence suggests that because most of our current day problems, we've obviously got terrible legacy of the past, but most of our current day problems are self-inflicted. They're a direct result of terrible government policy. So we're doing this to ourselves, and the only way that we can stop doing it to ourselves is to elect a government that has better policies and that we can go and fix the issues so that we can create a better life for everybody.
Yeah, look, I agree with you that there are some issues that the ANC drops the ball every day. And everybody knows that I'm an ANC member, and everybody in the ANC knows that I'm sort of generally a person who would criticize the ANC inside and outside the ANC. But I don't really buy this concept of an independent Cape as being a caring social welfare state, particularly if you're going to then further divide it into what is termed cantons. Well,
that's not our decision. That's your decision. So when you say, you're talking as if somehow Jack and I are going to decide what the Western Cape looks like. I'm going to have one vote. You're going to have one vote. You're going to have one vote. Not my decision. Not his decision. It's the people of the Western Cape's decision. And if most people think that the Cape Coloured Congress support the secession of the Western Cape or the wider Cape, they are a radical left-wing organisation at the end of the day, and I absolutely stand with Fardil Adams and say I agree with him that we're better off, but actually we're going to have very, very different policy positions. But it's not that I'm right or he's right. Ultimately, the people of the Western Cape must decide for themselves how they're going to be governed. And actually, if the majority of Western Cape voters accept a government that I didn't want, then fair be. I've served under many governments that I didn't vote for. That isn't the issue. But you have to have some skin in the game. You can't be trapped in a system where it doesn't matter who you vote for or what happens, you're screwed. And that's what's happening to the people of the Western Cape.
So look, we don't need referenda at all about testing testing this idea, because Jack, you've contested as the Cape Independence Party leader, and the Cape Independence Party accrued 2 seats in council in the city of Cape Town. That tells you that even though you now for the first time have 2 seats, that's really not you're not knocking out the lights, put it that way, with like great electoral power. So isn't that an indication that the idea like really isn't feasible, coming like out of the fringe into the mainstream?
No, not at all. I think what you'll realize when you actually poll people is that people vote for many different reasons, and there's a tremendous fear of the ANC in the Western Cape. And the DA has been very effective at tapping into that fear. What they tell people, and they bombard them with SMSs and phone calls and posters that say, if you don't vote for the DA, the ANC will take over the Western Cape. And the majority of people in the Western Cape are so terrified of this, even though it's a lie, that they vote emphatically for the DA because they believe in this story. But what we've seen is that the ANC has systematically declined ever since a decade and a half ago. And in 2018, what are the numbers here? In 2019, we saw that the ANC got 32%, the EFF got 2%, and more recently in 2021, the ANC got 18% and the EFF 4%. So, these parties which are dominating national politics are literally small parties here in the Western Cape, 18% and 4%. So, people need to get over the fear that the ANC is going to win ever in the Western Cape. It's never going to happen. People need to get over the propaganda that the DA put out there, that if they don't vote for the DA, the ANC is going to get in. So, we're up against those sort of difficulties. But, as we've seen, Cape Independence is exceptionally popular amongst the Western Cape and amongst DA voters. 2/3 of DA voters believe in Cape Independence. So, people will vote for the DA while still wanting to live in an independent Cape. So people vote for many different reasons. And we look forward. We grow every single election. We're getting bigger and bigger. And we are also really, looking forward to working together with those other parties in the Western Cape Devolution Working Group, as well as parties across the political spectrum, to bringing more devolution into the Western Cape, and ultimately Cape Independence, to set ourselves free from ANC control.
Yeah. So devolution, isn't that more sensible than taking an entire province out of the country? Aren't there common sense things that national and provincial government can do to efficientize the system, rather than just taking our ball and bouncing?
Of course they can. That's exactly how I opened our conversation. I said, I know where you stand politically. And I said, let me answer, people that are ANC supporters like yourself, or ANC members. Let me address that straight away, that you can support the Cape Independence Party without necessarily believing in outright Cape Independence. We obviously believe Cape Independence is the solution, but the way you get there is by having a negotiation. And if people want a devolved political system, then you need to start from the departure point of Cape Independence and work backwards and find a solution that would be workable. And you're absolutely right. We hope that the ANC would wake up to see the reality that the apartheid government could not continue endlessly with its oppression. The ANC government will not be able to continue with its oppression endlessly, and a certain point will come in the future where history will change, and they'll have to make a decision. Do we compromise our racist agenda and meet the people of the Western Cape halfway, or do we force them into no other solution but to pursue complete self-determination under the rights granted to us in the United Nations and international law?
Okay, so let's talk. That's a good segue into what I want to talk about. I think it's I don't agree with this idea at all. But let's drive this train down the tracks to see where we end up. So you mentioned the United Nations and you mentioned referendums. What are the mechanisms that you hope to achieve independence of the Cape, excluding the Eastern Cape and the Northern Cape, of course? I would contend for other reasons, but let's say the Western Cape.
I don't think we have to. So just what interesting on that point. If I just and I think your policy is the same as ours. So we have to understand that the reason under international, the Montevideo Convention 1933 defines what a country can be, and there are 4 criteria: a defined population, a permanent population, a government, a defined territory, and the ability to enter into negotiations with another state. And they're the 4 criteria. So the reason we end up with the Western Cape is because the Western Cape exists. There is a border. We know where the Western Cape is. It's got a parliament. It's got a premier. It's got a government, and it's got a population which is defined in its own voters' roll. It has its own elections. So the reason we start at the Western Cape is because the Western Cape exists. If we get to the point where the Western Cape wins a referendum on Cape independence is about to leave, that won't be the final thing. And I think Jack will be the same as me. Certainly our policy as an organisation is then at municipal level, along the border, every municipality should have its own then referendum, so we can decide democratically where do the borders of this territory, and certainly.
So full-on balkanization is what you're aiming for.
Absolutely, unashamedly so. And if you look at a voting map of South Africa, it's split in 2. And actually, I can tell you exactly where it is. If you Google it, you will see the most stark thing you can imagine. And there it is. It clear lines and where they are, and basically about the bottom half or the bottom 2/3 of the Northern Cape and the first quarter of the Eastern Cape historically vote with the Western Cape. You've got this clear territory that believes one way, and the other that's the other way. And in international law, that concept is called ideological affinity. In other words, what do these people? How do they want to live? And clearly, the people on either side of that line, which at this point isn't demarcated, so that line must be defined democratically. And actually, the United Nations say self-determination is a fundamental concept of democracy, just as democracy is a fundamental concept of self-determination. People must decide for themselves. So you're entitled to your view. I'm entitled to my view. It's not your decision. It's not my decision. It belongs to the people. And that's the key. And actually, one of the interesting things is when we looked at before the 2021 elections, 7 political parties, including the DA, including COPE, including the ACDP, came out and said, okay, we don't necessarily believe in Cape independence. In fact, those 3 don't. But we do accept that it's the decision of the Western Cape people to make, and that's their formal position because they respect this right of self-determination, which is in the South African Constitution, it's an international law, and actually it's called an ergas omnes right in international law, which means it's not even just South Africa's responsibility. If South Africa denies self-determination, other countries are entitled to enforce that right because it's such a fundamental human right that we can't end up being trapped. Just as people couldn't end up trapped in apartheid and people couldn't end up trapped in colonialism, this is neo-colonialism. It's the same thing. You've got this government in Pretoria that the people of the Western Cape never voted for, can't vote in, can't vote out. They're trapped in this system. And they have to have at least the option to get out. And if they vote to remain, then fair enough. But that's I think that's a critical sort of founding of where we start with that.
Absolutely.
That's where we disagree, because I think that, Jack, while you were out briefly, we spoke about the fact that, let's say, for example, in the thought experiment, I am South Africa and you are the Western Cape. You contribute 250 billion rand per annum into my fiscus. Why the fuck would I let you go? That makes no sense. Why would I cut off my own arm? So I am not going to then sanction a referendum for people who want to see my arm cut off with the question, should Roscoe cut his arm off or not?
Isn't that just the question that slave owners had? Why would I let my slave go? Why would I let my slave go?
I think calling people West Cape a slave is...
No, it's an extreme example.
It's not an extreme example. It's a perfect example. Why? You tell me, why does the ANC have dictatorial decision about saying, no, we're not going to let the Western Cape go? You tell me. How is that different from a slave?
I think there's huge differences between indentured labor and drawing lines on a map. I think they're massive.
We are enslaved. The Division of Revenue Act enslaves us. We are financial slaves to the national government, forking out 250 billion rand of our blood, sweat and tears, and the ANC, you're saying, will not let us go. That is slavery.
Yeah. So why, what is the mechanism that the ANC would have to have this referendum exclusively for the Western Cape? Because remember, The entire country has a stake in this. So why shouldn't the entire country take part in this referendum? I'll leave that open to...
Why don't we add in Zimbabwe? Why don't we add in Angola?
Because Zimbabwe is a sovereign state that's
we were a sovereign state prior to 1910. Okay. Where do you want to start history?
I've written a white paper on the law on this issue, which has been circulated around the universities and the major political parties. So first of all, it's a very, very complex subject. But let me just summarise it in terms of what is the law. So into its basic units. So first of all people have the right to self-determination. That's a phrase that appears consistently throughout international law, and South Africa itself has signed 3 charters since 1994: the African Charter of Human and People's Rights, the International Charter of Civil and Political Rights, and the International Charter of Economic, Cultural and Social Rights, all of which it's ratified since 1994, and all of which contain the words "all people are entitled to self-determination." So that starts off. The people of the Western Cape are entitled to self-determination. Self-determination applies to all people. Then, who are a people? Now, fortunately, the Western Cape is the only province in South Africa with its own constitution, and it starts with the words, "In humble submission to Almighty God, we, the people of the Western Cape." And just to clarify that, this bill that's been tabled this week in Parliament by the Freedom Front Plus, and hopefully the DA will be supporting that, and it's a bill we were heavily involved in, I helped write it, is called the Western Cape People's Bill, and that it uses that clause from the Constitution and affirms that the Western Cape people are a people under international law, they're entitled to self-determination. So first of all, the Western Cape people have a right to self-determination. How is self-determination exercised? Well, there are 4 ways, according to the United Nations, that you can exercise self-determination: devolution, federalism, secession or independence, and unification. In our situation, unification isn't really a factor. So they're the 3. Actually, ironically, when you talked about the indigenous people, unification would be perhaps an issue with them in terms of Namibia and so on. But you have those 3 aspects of self-determination. So first of all, and then how do the people exercise it? They exercise it in a referendum of the people who are part of the people, which is why we have that right in our constitution for premiers in their provinces to call referendums. It's a right that already exists. It's in the constitution, 1272F in the national constitution, 372F in the Western Cape constitution. So that right exists. So you have this right of self-determination.
In the Western Cape constitution.
In the Western Cape constitution,
which devolves from the national constitution.
Yes.
Respectfully, somebody who lives in KwaMashu will be affected by 250 billion rand suddenly being excised from the fiscus. So therefore, they should be given a right to vote in a referendum on Western Cape.
Okay, I'll tell you how exactly they're right. They do have rights, and I'll tell you exactly where they come in. So you have this right of self-determination. Then you have the referendum in terms of how do you want to apply that. And then you have a concept where you're supposed to use all reasonable measures first. Now, interesting enough, the Western Cape in 2019 elected a government that wanted devolution. Okay, so Windy campaigned on devolution. He was elected with a clear majority in devolution. He went to the ANC and said, "I'd like devolution," and they said no. So actually, first of all, devolution's off the table because the ANC have taken it off the table. The DA have asked, they've got a mandate from the people of the Western Cape, and the ANC said no. So the ANC has denied the Western Cape self-determination in the form of devolution. So it's off the table. We've now got federalism or independence, and that's the ANC's fault, and it's what Jack's on. If we get to a referendum, then what happens? And then you have the people like Peter Foss who will say, well, referendum, they're not binding in the South African constitution. And he's wrong. And the key thing is there are a number of critical judgments. And the critical judgment on referendums is the Quebec judgment, which was then later affirmed by the UK Supreme Court. And it was exactly this situation. Quebec held a referendum on independence and said, look, if we win, we want to go. Canada said, no, but what about us? And they agreed that they would hand it into the Supreme Court of Canada. They'd bring all the experts in from around the world and they settle this answer once and for all. And there's one paragraph that gives you all of the answers there. And it simply says this. First of all, if it says Quebec, but if the Western Cape votes to leave, it can't just dictate terms to South Africa because of exactly the reason that you've said. It actually has to take into consideration other people. But the reverse is true. The South Africa cannot stop the Western Cape from leading because the people of the Western Cape, what they have to do then is have a negotiation which takes everybody's interests into part. But ultimately, so what the Western Cape people would make a decision. The Western Cape government then must negotiate the terms of that with the national government, and hopefully they can reach a sensible agreement. If they can't reach a sensible agreement, you can either go to the International Court of Justice, as happened with Kosovo, or you can go to the United Nations Human Rights Council, Or, and that really would be a last resort, the International Court of Justice affirmed that if South Africa is just belligerent, the Western Cape can just leave. But that would be the last resort. So there's a clear process, and that negotiation process must take into consideration. And personally, I'm not speaking for my organisation, I actually think that as part of the settlement, the Western Cape should probably for a generation offer to assist the Eastern Cape, to assist the areas next to it and say, well, look, let's not make this an unamicable spot. We recognise we're more developed, you're less developed. So actually, rather than making this an ugly divorce, why don't we make this a friendly divorce? And look, let's just sort out the terms and let's help you build some capacity on your side of the border. But that's the process. But what can't happen is that South Africa just says, sorry, you're stuck there. We don't really care, it doesn't matter who you vote for or what you want, you're going to do what we say, because that's what it is, neo-colonialism.
We've got some feedback from Facebook. Nantel, do we want to run? This is quite
a lot.
Quite a lot, guys, yeah.
It's difficult to actually get them in some form of order, but let's just go with it.
We've dealt with this Debbie Ace thing, actually. I don't understand what it is.
Just say which one you want to do.
No, what is the God? What's this Ward 107 thing?
Yeah. We got a by-election coming up in Ward 107, and Debbie Else Campbell is our candidate there. She's done a lot of work fighting against the South African government. She was protesting against the extreme conditions of lockdowns where the police beat her up. She incurred some terrible injuries. She's got a lot of health problems. And she's fought against farm murders, etc. So she's got a tremendous track record of holding the government to account. And there was a smear campaign that went out against her that basically made all sorts of allegations, which were simply their word against hers, and not any single court ruling against her. So I believe she told me that there's going to be I think she's taken carte blanche to court or something to clear her name over the government literally trying to smear her. And this is what happens when you're over the target and you're fighting the good fight. People that want to take you down will do anything that they can to do that. So she's a fantastic candidate. We've got full faith in her. We think she'll do a fantastic job in Ward 107. And people should look at the positives, look at how much work she's done for the community. And I think that'll be a great vote, not just for Ward 107, but if people believe in Cape independence, if people believe in having a referendum to hold the ANC government to account, which is what an independent Cape would do, then they should please go out on the 28th of June and vote for the Cape Independence Party, vote for Debbie Campbell in Ward 107.
Jack, there's a lot of issues with. I don't understand the issue. It sounds like an in-house issue, and it just Debbie Campbell, whatever. I just heard about it now. From
it's politics. It's typical politics, you know.
I'm not interested in the stuff. So then, busting the myth of white genocide in SA. Nothing can hold the government to account better than Cape Independence. Name one thing you've held them accountable, Jack. Well, but you want to answer busting?
Busting. What's the question?
Name one thing you've held them accountable for. That's a Facebook question. Okay, let's go with that. What Jack is saying that the rest of Cape Independence is the biggest tool to keep the ANC accountable. What Jack has done is to conceive that West Cape Independence when you were still picking pimples. The government doesn't care about accountability. And then we've got another comment from that's the Debbie Else one.
What happens to nation sovereignty?
Nation sovereignty.
Yeah. So busting as here we go. Ethnically oppressed. We know what that means. So ethnically oppressed. Are you referring to white people being ethnically oppressed? Because you did mention farm murders now. Is that the ethnic oppression?
I think the most infatuation with race at this table is you. I mean, it's something you've been banging on from the start of this interview.
I think it's important. Yeah,
I think it's all you care about, and we don't. We don't care about race. We think it should be left in the relic of history. It's something that blinds one. It's something that Lee Kuan Yew didn't do in Singapore. It's something that you can literally, like Phil said, we should not be focusing on people's skin color. We should be focusing on good economic and political policies that we can put a roof over people's heads who are out there freezing in the cold.
Website,
Jack, can I just...
and I've answered it 100 times to that.
Can I just this is just me, right? So you're saying we shouldn't do the race thing, whatever. So I'm just reflecting on how the DA is running the Western Cape, because they have a similar way. They say, let's not talk about race, but look at the conditions of the Cape Flats, man. So you've got a brilliant way of putting your argument, and I agree with a lot of things that you're saying, but I'm just scared for parties that don't address the race thing up front, because then they have this backhand thing that happens in the reality, man. And I'm just scared about. I just want you to. How do you address that in reality, man? Because if you're going to say, no, race doesn't count, it actually does, because you can actually see the people in Constantia and you can actually see the people living here. So you need to address it actually, man. You get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, race matters because the ANC has made it about race for the last 3 decades. And like I said in the beginning of the show, is that we would put an end to all these ridiculous race-based policies. And when people have the ability to build their own communities and fishing communities can go out there and do what they've done for centuries, and you don't have the ANC coming and imposing these ridiculous restrictions on skin color, and people can actually get out there and get their kids in school but
shouldn't if I'm voting for a party, right, irrespective of what the party is, shouldn't you give more resources to somebody that doesn't have it than the ones that have? And isn't that race then in itself? Or are you just going to say the rich in the Western Cape is going to get the same as the poor, and you're going to have inequality? You're still going to have inequality, and you're still going to sit with the race thing. I'm really interested in politics to be breaking down to where a layman's person can understand it, man. If you, I don't see how you can address something. When it comes to people suffering and on the Cape Flats and not bringing race, man, because they have been divided, like you say, by the ANC. Because I'm not ANC by any stretch of the imagination, and the DA, because the DA is saying no, we don't do race, but you're actually doing race, dude, because you're actually neglecting the people from the Cape Flats. So how So the history has shown people that say they're not for race. You actually for race, dude. You actually bringing in the race crowd because you never address the problem that is race based.
Can I ask then? But what is the? So I would say, why do you get behind that and say, well, what is the problem? Is the problem race, or is the problem that people in the Cape Flats have shit housing, are unemployed, aren't policed properly, have terrible education systems? Isn't that the issue? And actually, shouldn't we be saying, how do we create jobs for the people in the Cape Flats? How do we police the Cape Flats better? How do we create a safe environment? How do we improve the education? And actually, that for me, so I kind of get it. So I think we mustn't be dismissive of race, and I think you're right in terms of there, but we also mustn't get obsessed with it because that's how we created all this mess in the first place. We actually have to come back and say, what's the problem we're trying to solve?
I think it's easier for somebody to say that it's from a certain class. If it's somebody that is in poverty and you don't know where your next meal is coming from, he's going to say, fuck, these people are looking down at me because I'm fucking black or because I'm colored. Sure. So he will definitely bring in race because he's the victim of the system. Because the system is lying to us. Sure. The system is saying, no, we're going to take, we don't race in, but then you do. But then they, I'm not saying you, but then they do. You know what I'm saying?
But I think it's a good point, and I think it's a good point of brought up. And I think but actually, let me turn that around and say, okay, well, look, We've had 30 years of trying to do that. So for 30 years, we've said the solution is, hang on a second, these issues are actually race-based. So let's address them by race-based policy. What's happened? Unemployment's gone up, economic growth's gone down, inequality's gone up.
I'm going to have to interject again, because now the thing is this: when you have for example, this new equity plan thing, right? The equity bill, whatever. So now then the DA comes and lie to the people and say that you're being oppressed, when the policy is actually for them to get a foot in the door, or to have a stake in the economy, really. Sure. So then they being racist actually when they run campaigns like that. So then they are bringing in race, really, dude.
No, but so I don't,
because they're doing it connively.
No, you're not.
So that's my problem when people say, when any let's say, and they say no, we equal. You lying to yourself. You lying to the ones that don't think deeper. Because once you come in power, you going to go the status quo and let the people in the Western Cape just rot in hell.
So my thing is like, I think that like if you immediately remove any agenda for that will change the structure that the National Party put into place, and the ANC has inherited, and in my view hasn't done enough, to really change the political economy of apartheid. If an independent Cape, and we don't know what these the policies would look like, but I've got a fair idea when you mentioned Singapore, if it does away with the politics of redress, it trenches the difference between rich and poor, which generally falls along black and white and coloured. So if we throw race out of the equation and not make that the factor, and we historical about the conditions, both these contemporary conditions that we're living with, really, we might as well bring back the National Party then for the majority of people.
Well, I really don't look, and I guess now we're on to it. Yeah, what we're now talking about different economic positions, because effectively you're talking about an interventionist state, and I'm talking about a freer market. So ironically, and I can send you the article. I wrote an article called "Alleviating Poverty in the Western Cape," and I'm not a out-and-out free marketer. I think there are some aspects of the market that because we've messed up so badly, we need some degree of state intervention. But the argument is not, and I think there's a difficulty now because you end up with these two scenarios. So I can understand the moral argument for BEE. I can understand the moral argument for affirmative action. I'm not blind to that. The point is, it just doesn't work. Yeah, it's destructive. And why is it destructive? Because we're not actually, I'm not a representative of the white race any more than you're representative. You're you and I'm me. And you will act in your best interest for the most part, and I will act in my best interest. So if I'm a businessman, and I'm not, I tried it and I was particularly bad at it, I have to say. So, but if I'm a businessman, I'm going to make decisions about what's best for me. So I'm going to sit and say, right, well, hang on a second. Shall I open up a factory? Oh, well, hang on a second. Not a great idea, because now if I get over a certain size, I've got to give away X number of shares. I can't. So suddenly, what happens is you start saying, well, I could just go and open that factory in the Netherlands, or I could go and open that factory in, or actually I could do something else. So what you end up with, I mean, and think of an example now where we make in BEE, we make ownership such a great thing. So now you have a situation that you have a factory. Now imagine a factory that's owned by a white person and employs 1,000 black people. The government won't support that factory. No grants are available to that because it's white owned. If you have a factory that's owned by a black guy or 1,000 white people, the government will support that. Yeah, it's absolutely nonsensical because
the white guy is going to make more than what the coloured people is going to. So then it's not addressing the real problem of poverty. Then it makes 100% sense. You just said it now.
It doesn't, because if you have no factory, what you end up.
I get what you're saying.
You don't have the 1,000 jobs.
I agree with you there. Yeah. But to say that it doesn't make sense, it does make 100% sense. Because if you're the owner of it, you're going to make way more than the people on the ground.
Okay, but actually, are we trying to solve? So what we're going to say? Are we trying to sort of punish white people perpetually for their past? And I agree that some deserve punishment. Or are we trying to lift black people out of poverty? Because for me, the important figure there is not who's the rich guy driving the Jag. the important statistic is, well, what about the 1,000 people who've got a chance of a job? They're the people that are important.
Okay.
And that's where we go wrong.
I don't agree. Equity is something that you can leave to as a generational thing, and that is something that the people of color have never had in this country. Well, recently we've obviously the tenders and that crap that the ANC is they just cut. So I do not agree with you, because the guy on top, he can leave money for his next generation. The people, the 1,000 people that they are just working towards getting to the place, because they're working on the Cape Flats, and the job is in Cape Town. And another thing that the DA is perpetuating. You know what I'm saying? Because they're not playing a race thing. They actually are playing the race thing. So everybody I'm still not convinced. Any political party that doesn't say and doesn't address the race thing, you're lying to yourself. Because at the heart of this is my personal opinion. At the heart of every person is tribal. We want our groups. And if you're in power, you're going to look out for your group. And that is irrespective of your white, black, whatever. That is, we saw it happening with the ANC, and we're seeing it happening with the DA. So how unfortunately, you have to address race, because it's a real thing.
Well, look,
I'm just going to come in here. I think Jack has to leave us. He has a private. How much time do you have?
Yeah, I'm due to. I should actually have left earlier already. I just want to leave on one sort of note, though, to say that, if we cut through all of the thickets of race-based politics and this and that, and we just ask ourselves a very simple question: from 1994 until now, under ANC rule, are you happy with the education system in South Africa? Are you happy with the electricity blackouts? Are you happy with the crime rate? Are you happy with the state of the economy? Are you happy with all these things? If you are, then fine, continue to vote for the ANC. But if you aren't happy, we're offering a solution. And we believe that Cape Independence is that solution. We believe that we can have a rainbow nation. We believe that you can have policies that do not persecute people based on skin color, we've seen countries around the world do it. We don't have to get caught in this colonial mindset of oppression, which is something the ANC is doing. It's something apartheid government, it's something the British Empire did after 1910. And I think that's the problem. I share the sentiment here where, I'm not a supporter of the DA's policies. I think the DA is a terrible party. That's why we try to hold them to account. We believe that their policies need to change just as much as we want to hold the ANC to account. And we hope that voters will see that by devolving power. The problem is when you give so much power to a political party, be it the DA, be it the ANC, be it the apartheid government, be it the Union Party and the British Empire, when you give so much centralized power to any political entity, they're going to use it to their own benefit, to the oppression of others. We believe that system is what creates all of the injustices in the world. If you break down that political system and give power down to the grassroots communities, which is what we believe an independent Cape should look like, then all of the problems that we're talking about will begin to deteriorate and disappear, and you will find true equality. So that's what we're fighting for. We hope that, I hope that, that sentiment, you can take some time to compare our manifesto with the ANC's. I don't know if you're happy with what the ANC's done for the last 30 years, but there's a lot of people that aren't happy, and we're going to try provide a solution to that.
No, cool. Jack, thanks for coming in. We'll kick each other's ass on a further occasion.
Thanks, Roscoe.
Cool.
Sorry?
Yeah. I think it's staying there.
Cheers, Roscoe. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah. But you're sticking around because there's a lot of things that I still want to cover. Yeah, I put it.
Also, you can go in.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much.
You can go in.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm going to take my jacket off. It's nice and warm in here. Toasty.
Yeah. So look, let's talk about. We were talking about the referendum.
Sure.
Okay. And I still don't think that it's even if you went to the Constitutional Court on this issue, the Constitutional Court will vote in the majority to strike this thing down. So you are without a viable option. Let's be realistic about this thing, and secession is something that's not gonna happen.
I don't believe that. I believe secession will happen.
How? Okay, so help me to understand why you believe so fervently that the Western Cape will have a referendum, but will secede, and that and this is the most important part, that South Africa will allow this to happen.
So, okay, well, look, so first of all, look, there are relative steps. So first of all, we've polled this, so it was interesting because I mean, obviously we talked about the different parties. So in South Africa, the statistics, the last time we polled this, and I think they've gone up since then. We're about 58% of Western Cape voters support a referendum being held on Cape Independence. 46% support Cape Independence outright. 72% of those are DA voters, and actually in the last election 5.3% voted for parties with Cape Independence in the manifesto. That was the three parties. So that's the kind of statistics. So there's substantial support for this. In terms of the referendum, why? Because we're a pressure group and we spend our days putting political parties under pressure. It's not coincidence that the DA have brought their referendum legislation. It's as a result of pressure. I'm not going to divulge details, but I was personally involved in that process. And the reason the referendum legislation has been tabled is because of the Cape Independence movement and the pressure that the DA are under. And the DA recognise, because support amongst DA voters is even higher for Cape Independence too, but for a referendum. And before the 2021 elections, the DA were publicly forced to agree that it was a decision for the Western Cape people, and privately they promised us a referendum. So I've been promised a referendum by the leadership of the DA.
By who specifically?
By John Steenhuisen.
Okay, interesting.
So
he said, like, look, Phil, we're going to have a referendum, come what may.
So the question was that. The agreement that we had with the DA was that they would fix the referendum legislation and that they would call a referendum including a question on Cape Independence. And the reality is the DA want to hold referendums on other issues, and our referendum law allows for multiple questions. So I don't think you're going to see just a Cape Independence referendum. You're going to see a referendum that's got lots of questions on there. I think there'll be a question about policing, there'll be a question about rail. I think almost certainly because the DA support federalism, there'll be a question about federalism, and I think we'll have a range of views. And I think one of the things that will be interesting to see, I said to you that the ANC have turned down devolution, so that's kind of off the table now to a certain extent. We've now
Yes and no.
We've now got. Look, and the DA have been silly buggers. Cameron Dugmore, said when he was under pressure for Cape Independence, he said, we'll never allow Cape Independence, but let's talk about devolution. And then actually when the DA came and talked about devolution, they said, no, never. So you can't have it both ways too, in the day. So if there's a compromise, the compromise must come from the ANC and the national government to say, guys, listen, we don't want this Cape Independence movement to take root. And actually, it's not my plan, but 60-something% of the parties in the Western Cape Parliament have federalism as a policy. If the ANC said, okay, look, we're not going to fight you. Let's talk about a federal dispensation because you guys want it, the IFP want it, and then that's going to cut Cape Independence off its knees. There are solutions here, and whether I like them or not, but it takes two to tango. So you only operate in that space. So I believe a referendum is going to take place. I don't think the DA want to hold that referendum. I don't think they have much intention. If they can get away with not honouring that agreement, they won't. But they have tabled the referendum legislation. It took them 2 years to do it, and I think I've called it their Stalingrad strategy. Like Zuma, I want my day in court. Well, we think it's a decision for the Western Cape people, but we're going to take as long as we possibly can to allow them to have that decision. But we're not helpless in that. So we're about to launch a major campaign. So before 2024, there'll be a massive campaign putting the DA under pressure on a referendum on Cape Independence. So I'm confident we'll get one. I've always thought the biggest risk, support for Cape Independence is marginal. Where we've polled the last time we polled, support amongst white voters was at about 70%. Amongst coloured voters, it was just over 50%, and amongst black voters, it was at 20%. So that's the kind of the support for Cape Independence, and collectively that brought us to 46%. I talked to a lot of the political pollsters. All of them are currently telling me if a referendum was held today on Cape Independence, they all believe that we'd vote leave, so we'd win the referendum. But I mean, obviously things are pretty rough at the moment, and I don't think they're any better. But so I think Yes, there'll be a referendum on Cape independence because we'll make one happen. I think we'll probably win it, but that's what I think is the biggest risk. Once we've won it, what the courts around the world, and the Canadian court found it, and last year the UK court found it, is that in a democracy you can't ignore the will of the people. So now so therefore you're forced into this negotiation. The DA can't just say, well, we've held a referendum, we're going to ignore the outcome. And the national government, for all it's done, it's a connected world. It's not easy. We've seen this week, how it can go horribly wrong on the international stage. And for the ANC to really turn its back on its entire legacy and say, look, you know what, we said we were up for democracy, but actually there's been a referendum here in line with the South African constitution, and we're just going to deny the outcome and tell the people of the Western Cape they can't have what they want. That's not an easy position to maintain. And so first of all, I don't think it's that easy for the ANC to say no. So I think people just say, oh, they won't honour it, but that's not so easy. But even if they don't honour it, that actually plays into the hands of the Western Cape. And in all of these cases, there's lots of secessions around the world, and all of these cases you can go to actual historical events and see what happened in that situation. So the event you're talking about, the best example is Kosovo and Serbia. And Kosovo said, we want to leave, we'll have a referendum. Serbia said, you're not leaving. Kosovo said, well, we are. The international community said, look, hey, we don't want this fight to start all over again. Let's refer this to the International Court of Justice in The Hague, and we'll get an advisory opinion. And in 2010, the International Court of Justice said there's no provision in international law on the unilateral declaration of independence. Kosovo declared itself independent, recognised by 120 or 130 countries. Didn't matter what Serbia wanted, Kosovo was independent. Ultimately, it won't matter what South Africa wants. The Western Cape can make itself independent if it wants to. But that isn't in everybody's best interest. It's not in South Africa's best interest.
Phil, I don't think that's quite the flex that you think it is, drawing up the Serbia example, because that was a clear case of playing one ethnicity against another. And earlier on, I said, you want to go for full balkanization? You said, yeah. So again, it comes down to this thing about the makeup of the type of support who would support Cape independence. As you said, the majority of white people support Cape independence.
But most Cape independence supporters are coloured. White people are a very small population of the Western Cape.
Because of the success story of apartheid in creating this class of coloured people that actually...
that's a bit patronising, is it not?
It's not patronising.
I think it's
patronising. It's absolutely not patronising. That was a success story of apartheid, to create this kind of a class of coloured people that will go with whatever the white person says. So I think to lean on that is a little bit... I think also the fact that they... Well, I can say it because I'm a coloured person who understands the dynamics of and the cultural fabric of what happens in the Western Cape. And I think this whole thing it's a little... especially when you draw the example of the Eastern European states and say balkanization of the country. This entire thing...
balkanization doesn't have to be on race. The Western Cape won't break away. We're not a people in the context of we've not got a single culture, we've not got a single language, we're not a single ethnicity. So the Western Cape people isn't a race-based thing. Actually, the overriding characteristic of the Western Cape is ideological affinity, which is how we vote. That's the difference. So and that's a matter of record. So the great thing with that is it's empirical fact. We've got 30 years of the voting. We know how the Western Cape voted. We know how the rest of South Africa's voted, and they're poles apart. In 2019, in the last election, the ANC and the EFF got 29% or 33 was it in the Western Cape between the two of them, 28% for the ANC and 4 or whatever it was for the EFF3, and in the rest of the country they got 73% of the vote. You've got this staggering difference that we just want different things, and when I say balkanization, that's what I mean, which is people who are non-racialists and free marketeers, and I use the word loosely because I'm not an avid free marketeer. I believe there has to be some intervention, compared to African nationalists and socialist-leaning people in the rest of the country, and we've got these two different things, and it comes back to the whole thing. Why is it an issue? On what basis does it become an issue for the people of the Western Cape to make a decision that we kind of like to go our own way? You would never come on. The equivalent would be saying to people that have been married and they're in a terrible marriage, it's going horribly wrong. Say no. You guys got married. You are going to see it out for the next 50 years, albeit if you hate each other, albeit if it's all going horribly wrong. We are going to make you honour that agreement. That's not how it works. You ultimately have to recognise this just isn't working. And both go and we become decent neighbours, trading partners. We're all going to have friends on both sides of the border, and we just make this thing work. I mean, it doesn't need to be an issue.
I mean, that's a fantastical, almost a fabulism that the Western Cape is just going to go its own way and everybody's going to be fine with it, because South Africa has the monopoly of force. So you can come with all the pieces of paper, the referendums you like. The fact is that you are part of South Africa.
Sure.
But
we've got these rights under the Constitution. So what are you? So if I understand your argument, is it doesn't matter what the Constitution says. It doesn't matter what international law says, which is recognised in the Constitution. Actually, the ANC are never going to let you go because they've got all the guns.
And in fact, we have the South African Constitution that is quite clear about the referendum that affecting national issues should be called on a national basis. And this is something that affects the national.
This is a provincial referendum, and it's.
But if you leave South Africa, that affects the rest of South Africa. So somebody in the northwest should be able to vote on.
Nowhere in the world has that ever happened. And this comes up with people, and it's one of the most common things people come up. If you could show me a single example of any and if you go to, ironically, Wikipedia actually have a good page of you can Google independence referendums. It'll show you every single independence referendum in the last century. Find me one where the whole country voted as opposed to the city. There isn't one, I promise you, but go and search for it. And I always say, if you can just give me one example where that happened in the world, then we can talk about it. But I can give you every single one. You'll see that just isn't how it works. You would like it to work that way, it doesn't.
So you're saying that if you have this referendum, it's going to happen that the Western Cape leaves South Africa.
Well, because that's what the law says. And actually, there has to be a negotiation. And you're quite right in terms of, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to allow people to cross the border? What's going to happen with trade? How are we going to settle the national debt? Who's going to get citizenship? There's all sorts of questions that have to be resolved, and they have to be resolved fairly. And that's not going to be an easy negotiation. We saw in Brexit, it took 3 years for Brexit to happen as the two sides. But that would be that wasn't a secession, would be a great example. Of actually you've got these two parties who the EU doesn't want the UK to leave, the UK does want to leave, but ultimately neither one can unilaterally just dictate. They have to find, because we're in the real world, and so I don't think South Africa has any intention of forcing that militarily. I don't think it could anyway, but even if it could and it was going to, then there would be no better argument for Cape. If actually our democracy is so frail that whatever we vote for, even if we vote for our freedom, they're going to make us stay at the end of a gun, then that absolutely tells you. In other words, listen, you're not going to get divorced, because if you do get divorced, I'm going to come around with my gun and I'm going to shoot you, or I'm going to beat the living daylights out of you.
My interpretation is that is well within the rights of South Africa to enforce it militarily, because this is seditious.
Okay, so it's not because it's not seditious.
Why isn't it seditious?
Well, because it's a constitutional right.
But you are making a decision. You are affecting the sovereignty of the country and the ability to govern citizens in far-flung areas of this country.
I'll send you the law. Well, you have to send me afterwards. We'll go through the report, and you ask me, and I'll send you all the things I said I'll send you, because I'm a man of my word. It's quite clear in the international report. The law says that countries cannot use territorial sovereignty to hollow out the right of self-determination. Self-determination trumps sovereignty.
But you're choosing which people have the right to self-determination. But it's again what we said with Jack. But like I saw that the Cape Party, the Cape Independence Party, the logo it used to be the whole of the old Cape province. Yeah. Right? And I know you're not in the position to talk about Cape Independence Party issues. But like this arbitrary line, which just so happens to contain mainly white and pliant colored people to have this agenda.
I was behind, so not for them directly, but when I got involved in the Cape Independence, a lot of people were advocating for that wider thing, and I was one of the first voices that said, look, Western Cape.
Why?
Because why? Because a referendum on Cape independence is winnable in the Western Cape, and it's not winnable in the. And you can see, who does the Eastern Cape vote for? It votes for the ANC. So how is these? So actually, the Eastern Cape is being governed by the party it votes for. The Northern Cape is being governed by the party it votes for.
Yes.
The Western Cape has never been governed by the party it votes for. So that's the difference.
No, it's been governed by the DA.
Okay.
People have voted for the DA.
At a provincial level, but not at a national level. Have you ever looked to see go and look at Schedule 5 of the Constitution, which is the exclusive powers of provinces. The DA controls liquor licences, abattoirs, and everything else is under the national government. Economic policy, national government. Race-based policy, national government. Labour law policy, national government. All of those major decisions, policing, national government, transport, national government, fishing, national government. So actually, we've got what's called a quasi-federal system, which means it looks like a federal system, but it isn't, because they've got so little power at provinces. And actually, these two bills that have just been tabled are the first real bills where the Western Cape government has got its elbows out. And I was the person that wrote the first draft of one of them, and the other one was a direct response to it. So I know that, and that is the first time that the Western Cape government is starting to stand up and pass legislation on behalf of the Western Cape people, as opposed to being just a tick box exercise for the national government. And I love it. That's democracy. Our parliament making decisions for our people, and that is how it should be.
Don't you think it's an outcropping of kind of like a grievance in a way? That, you say that, we have never been allowed to govern ourselves. But if you look at the example in America, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump, but Trump was the president. That is the system that the Americans have to live in. So you just have to be better.
But how long did Trump stay as president? Not very long.
He served the term.
And then he was voted out here in the Western Cape. People now look. So for most people, and ironically it's worse for coloured people, for most people in the Western Cape, they've never been governed since 1994. If you're an older coloured person, you've never, full stop, in your entire life, you've never been governed by the party you voted for. Because actually, before 1994, you weren't governed by the party you voted for either. So you've got people who just deny democracy. Yeah, and you can't have a situation where you've got 7 million people, 3.2 million voters, a parliament, a premier, a constitution, and you can't make decisions for yourselves.
But that's not a refusal. Is that not a refusal to accept democratic outcomes?
Well, it's not democratic outcomes. The democratic outcome. What's more democratic than a provincial referendum for the people? What you're saying is this decision of drawing up this map of South Africa in 1910 is stuck for all time. Well, it can't be. We made that decision in 1910 and we're stuck with it. Well, we're not stuck with it. If that was the decision we made then, right now we must decide, and international law is very clear on this, by the way, that actually self-determination is a right which never expires, and it must be constantly adjusted to the will of the people at that point in time. So the people of the Western Cape, do they want to be in a relationship with South Africa now, knowing what they know, having seen what that actually means? And if they say yes, great. And if they say no, also great. Surely it's their choice. How can it be simply, well, hang on a second, there's more people in Gauteng, KZN and the Free State than there are in the Western Cape. So what happens is those three provinces will eternally get what they want, and the people of the Western Cape will be internally denied what they want. That's not a fair system.
So this is not at all about loss of relative privilege?
Well, for me, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Are there going to be people who have self-image? I'm sure there are. But for me, I can absolutely, and certainly for my look, our team, by the way, is multiracial, 3 races. We're run by an organisation with people of all 3 races run our organisation. We put out a video, I'll send it recently, called My People, My Values, My Africa. We put it out in all 3 languages, an English version, Afrikaans version, a Xhosa version. Our constitution is written in all 3 languages. Actually, this is this is not about privilege. Actually, for me, and again, I mentioned the article. That probably, if you want to see my personal manifesto, alleviating poverty in the Western Cape, that effectively is my personal manifesto that says, look, why am I doing this? I want to create a future for my children. I'm on my second marriage and they're young, and I'm British by birth. I can take them overseas. I don't want to. I married an Afrikaner. I want them to stay here and grow up. They're Afrikaans speaking, and this is their home. I want that for my friends, and I want it for my compatriots. And I love the people of the Western Cape. I love them all. Yeah? And I want them to have better lives. I genuinely want them to have better lives, and they're not getting it. Yeah? South Africa is a screw up. It's a screw up from a government that we didn't vote for, and we have to fix that.
No, but we did vote for it.
We didn't in the Western Cape.
But why do you accept democratic outcomes that, or not accept democratic outcomes that you disagree with?
But you're separating. You're kind of saying, well, hang on a second. This one part of that. So we had a national election. You're saying, well, hang on a second. We had this national election, and that got that outcome. So therefore, we're always stuck with that. And therefore, all these other parts of the Constitution don't count. Well, they're all together. They're part of the same document. So what does the South African Constitution says in Section 235? It talks about self-determination. In Section 232 and 233, it talks about how international law is law in the Republic. So you can't divorce one from the other. And I didn't create the Western Cape. I didn't create the Western Cape Voters' Roll. I didn't create the Western Cape Parliament. It exists. The Western Cape Voters' Roll exists. Those people exist as an entity. The Western Cape Constitution says, we, the people of the Western Cape, they're the people that are entitled to self-determination. I'm not making these rules up. They're there. I'm just saying there's the rules and we'd like to use them. And why would you say, well, there's those rules, but you can't use them? I mean, why could we not use them?
No, I understand. I still disagree with you about that. Of course, we're not going to meet each other.
No, I get that.
We'll never meet each other.
We don't have to.
Yeah. So look, this hypothetical thing called the Independent Cape.
Sure.
What would its orientation be with Africa and the rest of South Africa? How would you manage those relationships?
Well, I would anticipate that we would have very, very good relationships with the rest of South Africa. I mean, I think we'd be a member of SADC. I think there's probably going to be some difficult issues to start off with. I think it's going to be it'll be just like the EU leaving, the UK leaving Brexit. It'll be a bit frosty to start off with, but at the end of the day, we're next to each other. We've got parts of common culture. We trade together, and ultimately, in the same, Namibia closed its border to South Africa. Is there antagonism between Namibia and South Africa? Of course, there isn't. At the end of the day, we've got a border and there's a customs post, but effectively we're cousins, and we'll remain cousins. And I think that those relationships will normalise, and I think the Western Cape will fulfil a specific role. I think the Western Cape has a different ideology to the rest of South Africa, quite a unique ideology. It's more Western orientated. It's not Western, but it's more. But in terms of, it's much more aligned to to sort of freer market type systems. Its trading partners are different. Where China is the biggest trading partner of South Africa, actually Europe and the US are the biggest trading partners of the Western Cape. We have a different history, So you're going to have a different set of relationships. And
we have the same history.
We don't have the same history.
Of course, we have the same history.
How do we
this is where it's like we've had in history the Khoi San, Khoi in the San had set up. They were a thriving community.
They were the indigenous people.
There was a trading post. There were merchants and traders and the only difference is that Jan van Riebeeck decided he tries to stay here one day, as opposed to all of the other traders who just sort of passed through.
Sure, and whether that's good or that's bad, that's our history. And we had the Khoi or the Khoi, and we had the San. There were distinct groups, and then we had settlers, and we've had waves of immigrants. And we had the Dutch turn up, the Portuguese before them, the Dutch stayed, the British, the Germans, the French. We're now having causa immigration. We don't
have causa immigration.
Well, immigration is the wrong word. Migration. We have, and I have no issue with that, by the way, as long as it's done legally. So the Western Cape's history is actually of waves of immigrants, and we have this. And actually, what's happened is when those people have arrived, they've mixed. They've created their own language. Afrikaans is indigenous to the Western Cape. It was first spoken in the Boer Kaap. It was originally a Muslim language, as I'm sure you know. It was then codified in Paarl. That's our heritage, and we have all these things. We have Cape cuisine, we have Cape architecture, but we have this history, and that's different. That's completely different to Zulu history, or to Venda history, which is just as powerful, and there's no shame in that. I think, but our history is different. You can't say that we have this, that it was all this one big population. It had a very, very different. The Cape had a very, very different history to the. And ironically, one of the things that many people don't know is a thing called the Schreiner Delegation in 1910. And actually, if you want to sum up the history, so 1910, when the British were about to form South Africa, and they wanted to create a racial franchise, there was a thing called the Schreiner Delegation, which was a multiracial delegation, whites, black, coloured, who sailed to England to plead with the UK government to exclude the Cape from all race-based legislation. That's our history. Now that is very different to the history of, for example, the Boer estates up north and so on. And I'm not judging anybody in terms of that. I'm just saying that we have this unique history that we should be proud of. And there are parts of it that are obviously bad, but same as every other country. And here we are.
Right. So what I was talking about, the rest of South Africa is under no obligation to treat this thing called the Western Cape as a friendly state. You know, the first thing. So you basically rolling the dice on this.
Well, we're not really rolling the dice because what you have in those is it's just like, and look, it's a great example because it's so recent. It's just like the UK and the EU over Brexit. You know, the EU wanted to be really hard-assed and say we're not going to do this. We're talking about hard exit, and the UK wanted to, but then reality sets in, and both sides have to make compromises because ultimately you have to make it work. So you have this situation. People say, well, hang on a second, the South African just closed the borders and stopped trading with you, and then what are you going to do? Well, that's fine, but for first and foremost, for example, South Africa has got colossal debt. Now, the Western Cape will have to take some of that debt with it, and would willingly take that debt with it. If South Africa says, well, screw you, we're going to be completely uncooperative, then the Western Cape's just going to say, well, screw you, we're going to be completely uncooperative. It doesn't mean that the Western Cape's on a trade route. It's got to, so you end up with this mutually assured destruction. And the Western Cape people, Ramaphosa's got a house here, 2 houses here, so you're going to have a situation where people are going to want to know, well, what about our citizens? We're going to want to make sure they're treated fairly, and of course they must be. So it's very easy to say, well, we're just going to be belligerent, but in the real world, it's not very easy to be belligerent because both sides are going to have leverage over the other, and ultimately, it's going to be in all of our best interests to move forward. And what's going to happen, more importantly, is the minute the Western Cape gets independence, other parts of South Africa are going to be me too, me too, me too.
Exactly. No, that's true. And let's say, for example, KZN independence or parts of it. Yeah. That goes to my main point about, I think a lot of the stuff has been driven by grievance and a loss of relative privilege. That's not a loss of actual privilege, just perceived privilege. So if for a Zulu king to be granted a kingdom, obviously they'd go for that. Obviously they would go for that. But the point is that the unitary construct of the Republic of South Africa is much stronger than the constituents. Than it's the sum of its parts. Well, there's no obligation for us to not slap punitive tariffs on the independent West Cape. There's no obligation on us to actually not send the tanks in.
Well,
and to be honest with you,
there is, that would be against the law.
So what? My point is, so what? And when you argue for like the Cape independence, that people of the Cape want to be independent, you have to understand that not everybody in the Cape feels like that. So what's stopping me and my cohort of people from like blowing up the power station, sabotaging the railway lines? Because my whole thing was like, actually, fuck you. So this thing about like the I'm going to live next to my ex-girlfriend and we're going to be friends forever and there'll be no issues, no
gonna stab
complications. It's just not going to work out the how you think it's going to work out.
Well, look, I think the same old thing. I think both sides have got to be careful of being fanciful. So let's just play that scenario through. Let's imagine you're correct. So actually, what happens? The Western Cape declares independence based on a democratic vote. It follows the constitutional process, calls a referendum in accordance with the constitution, follows international law, negotiates with South Africa, and South Africa responds by rolling in the tanks in breach of international. You say, so what? It wasn't the ANC that brought down the apartheid government. It was the international community. What do you think the international community is going to do? We've seen what the international community thinks of the ANC this week. Now, and that's just because they cocked up their usual stuff with paperwork and stuff. Now imagine if actually they end up start rolling into the Western Cape. Of course, if the ANC wants to roll in and militarily occupy the Western Cape, in the first instance it'll be able to. But that would be an absolute disaster. Nothing will make Cape independence more certain. Because South Africa becomes a pariah state, all of a sudden there's sanctions, there's problems. You suddenly find that all of the allies just get behind the Western Cape, and actually maybe it delays it a couple of years, but it'll be an untenable position.
So you say that the Western Cape has more of a Western orientation in terms of like the Atlantic powers and also.
Well,
you would orient, your idea is that the Western Cape would be oriented more towards that order.
No. So you've got to be careful. So first of all, we're policy neutral. So that isn't our decision. So to be absolutely clear, apart from non-racialism and democracy, there are only two things. And actually, the people of the Western Cape must decide for themselves. Why do I say that the Western Cape is more Western? Well, because that's what it is now. It's got a more Western history. It's got a more Western population. It has more Western trading values. And when we've seen on the Ukraine war, we've seen the Western Cape government painting up its the town hall in Cape Town in the Ukraine colours and banning Russian diplomats. So I'm not saying, because that's not my decision to make, I'm just telling you what the reality is now. So I don't know what the people of the Western Cape for certain are going to vote for post-independence. Maybe I'll get exactly what I don't want. But I can look back and say, well, what have they voted for the last 30 years? And it'll give me a pretty good idea of what they're likely to vote for. And that's the reality. So, but ultimately that's their decision, not mine. And I think there are a lot of people, ironically, there are a lot of people in the Cape Independence movement who are very anti the West. So I by no means is it guaranteed that the independent Cape would be pro-Western. But at this point in time, there's a more Western character of the we know it. We've got a completely different history in terms of how do we all get here? How did the coloured people come into existence? By the mixing of the indigenous people and European settlers and so on. And that's part of our history, good, bad, or ugly.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's, again, you can't speak on policy neutral, but I think that would be as a more Western orientation, more liberal orientation.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's the most likely outcome. I would agree with you on that. So I just think as long as we have the distinction that it's not our decision, I think that's what's likely to happen. Yeah. Yeah,
because we've seen the DA have conducted their own sort of shadow or parallel foreign policy. We saw Musi Maimane with Benjamin Netanyahu when he was the leader of the DA. Musi, not Benjamin Netanyahu, but one can make the argument. We've seen him go to Taiwan. Recently, we've seen John Steenhuisen go to Ukraine. So I think it's fair to say that based on that, if we extrapolate that, it will be more of a Western orientation. Okay, so we agree that is probably the most likely. Right. Now, the final thing I want to talk to you, Phil, is like, how are we going to pay for this? Because you want to build a wall and you want to make Mexico pay for it, effectively.
No, we don't. No, we don't. So I genuinely think a negotiation. So first of all, I disagree with some of Jack's numbers, but I think they're oversimplification. But where he's right is there are two provinces that pay into the South African system. The Western Cape and Gauteng, and everybody else draws down. So the Western Cape pays into the system. The Western Cape will financially be far better off on its own than if it remains in South Africa, and that's just a statistical fact. But I think that's all part of the negotiation. And as I mentioned earlier,
Alton, we have to get into this because this is we can't roll the dice here. I mean, this is like if you say it like, wow, we have 250 billion, we generate 250. We put 250 billion into the fiscus, into treasury every year. I want to understand what is the drivers of that economic activity.
Sure. Well, what are the big sectors in the Western Cape?
Right. So let's break it. We got agriculture,
tourism, fintech.
Yep.
And I think they're the big three. There's a fourth one, obviously. Look, there's obviously a service economy, but I think those are the three biggies, aren't there? And then
right. So effectively, this independent Cape, it needs to pay for itself to sustain itself, not take any loans, pay the debt on three sectors effectively.
So the Western Cape currently produces 14% of South Africa's GDP from 11% of the population. Mm-hmm. So the Western Cape has I think it's 11.2% of South Africa's population lives in the Western Cape, and that 11.2% of the people produce 14% of South Africa's GDP, and 15.4% of South African taxpayers reside in the Western Cape. Mm-hmm. So that's and ironically, of the money coming back to provinces, South Africa allocates 10.2% of the money that's allocated to provinces back to the Western Cape. So we're effectively paying 14% in, we're getting 10.2% back. That's how the system works at present. Yeah. So on that basis, obviously it's far more complex than that, but on that basis, effectively, if we didn't pay 14% in and we didn't get 10.2% back, you can see we're better off. But I think we have to have a responsibility to and I would say, so you're going to have this situation where you say, well, how do we make this non-confrontational? And I've said to you, I would, for me, I think the border must be defined democratically, and I think we have an obligation to at least try and help the areas around us because it's going to benefit us to have successful neighbours.
Phil, I'm going to ask you again because I think you're meandering off to.
Okay, no, bring it back then.
So look,
I like a meander.
Yeah, me too. So say something like ports and infrastructure for which national government has responsibility to build and maintain. The Western Cape would then need to do the payroll of the. There's a lot of costs that the Western Cape has to absorb that you're not really.
No, so people are forgetting, and I think that's why I disagree with Jack because you have to allow for the national, but that's coming from the 40. Don't forget, the national government doesn't make any money; it gets everything out of taxpayers.
Okay, what's the budget of let's say the Western Cape?
I only got it in percentages. I haven't got the numbers in front of me, but I think
that's quite an important thing to have.
Okay, it is, but actually, if we sit here and we talk about, so for example, do we talk about it in rand or in dollars, and then they change so quickly so it's easier to look at the percentages because it stays relative. That's the big picture. There are reports. There's been a unfortunately it's not been released, but there was an economic a tax flow report that was done, which so I have seen my numbers checked in great detail by an economist. It's never been released. It wasn't our report, so we can't release it. But I know my numbers are right because they're reflected. They got to, it took.
I mean, that's a simple question. What is the budget of the Western Cape?
Okay.
Also absorbing those other costs that the Western Cape would have to take on, and how will we be able to make the Western Cape sustainable?
But what additional costs are you talking about?
For example, there's to run the ports, for example.
But who's paying for that now?
National government.
But where's national government getting the money from?
From the Western Cape.
Yeah. Okay. So
let's say, for example,
if we're not giving it to the national, so right now we're giving the national government 14%.
Yes.
And they're giving us 10% back.
Yes.
And they're paying for the ports. Well, if we just don't give them the 14% and we pay for the ports, we're better off. The national government doesn't make money from anything. There are only two provinces paying into the system. Actually, at this point in time, not only is the Western Cape paying for the Western Cape's ports, it's paying for the Eastern Cape's ports, it's paying for the KZN's ports. So we're already paying for those ports. And I thought you were asking a different question because the other one that people often ask is, well, who's going to pay? You're going to have to pay for the ports because we built them. In other words, Cape Town Airport was paid for by South African taxpayers, so you must pay us back for it. And actually, the answer is, but actually, our Tambo Airport was paid by South African taxpayers, of which the second biggest portion is the Western Cape. So if we do an adding up of what you owe us and what we owe you, you'll owe us more than we owe you because we've been paying more into the system than we've got out for 30 years.
Have you calculated that you're going to have to pay? Let's say, for example. You're going to have to take over the healthcare system. You're going to have to pay those workers. You're going to have to pay those.
We're paying for it now. The national government doesn't have any money. It only gets money from the provinces.
But you're not paying. But the Western Cape is not paying for it now. If it was responsible for, because it's responsible for the services that the provincial government provides. Sure. If they help me understand, if I'm employing, if there's a hospital and I'm employing X amount of nurses and doctors,
sure.
that's being paid by nationally. For example.
But where's that money coming from? It's coming from the Western Cape.
Okay, so the Western Cape,
we're paying into the system. The money's coming from us in the first place. They're only giving us our own money back. When they pay for hospitals in the Western Cape, they're paying for it with the money that we gave them. So actually, right now we're paying for our hospitals. And we're paying for some of other people's hospitals too. And afterwards, we'll only be paying for our hospitals because we'll no longer be paying for somebody else's unless we choose to. And ironically, I suggest that it would be make it a much easier split if we continue to pay for a while to have a transitional period, because that would make it. But right now, we'll be better off because we're paying less. Because right now, we're paying for everything in the Western Cape, and then we're paying towards other provinces too.
Have you done a study on this?
Yes.
Do you know have you done a budget? Is there a business case for this independent Western Cape?
So there's as I said, there's a tax flow study that wasn't done by us. So and whilst I've seen it and I know what it says and I've dissected it in detail. Mm-hmm. So first of all, when we drew up, look, I'm a numbers guy, so I drew up this formula, if you like, in terms of, and you go, where do you get the numbers from? So where are the taxpayers? You go to Treasury. You go to Treasury's report, you find out how much of the money's coming. You go to SARS and you say, well, where are all the taxpayers? And this is all public data. You can go to the Western Cape government. So this is all public, and then you get all of that information, and you pull it together, and then you work it out. Then when we first started, I took that to an economist. In fact, I took it to more than one economist. Said, look, here are our calculations. Are you comfortable that this is a fair representation, albeit it's not a drill down detail? Mm-hmm. And the economist said yes. That's a fair assessment. But then, ironically, as I said, some completely different organisation, it's not for me to say who, but a well-known organisation, major organisation, did a tax flow study on the Western Cape, and they ran all the thing, and their number came out within about 2% of my number. Although theirs was by an economist that was 35 pages long, and mine was one sheet here, but effectively we ended up at the same place because the facts are the facts. It's you know obviously they've drilled into more and more detail, and they're saying, well, hang on a second, this money's paid by this organisation, and hang on a second, X is coming from fintech, and where actually mine is just, well, you can go and see, well, which, on the Western Cape government's report, what percentage of GDP did we contribute? Well, we know it's 14%. We can go to SARS and say, well, how many taxpayers live in the Western Cape? Well, 15.4% of taxpayers live in the Western Cape. We can go to the census and say, well, what percent of South Africa's population lives in the Western Cape? So all of that data is publicly available. You've just got to pull it together.
Do you understand what that's revenue? That's purely revenue. Do you understand what your operational and capital costs are going to be to run this independent Western Cape? Because you're gonna have to build a military, right? Mm-hmm. That's expensive.
But who's paying for the military now?
All those things Phil, are come on. You've not done the maths on what you're going to spend. What this independent state is going to spend.
You're digging into something,
but it's important to dig into it.
No. I can't mind digging. What I mean is you're missing the big picture here. So in other words, right now there's a police force. There are hospitals. We're already paying for them. So you keep saying, in other words, who's paying for the military? The bit that you're missing is that we're already paying for those things. So who's paying for the military now?
I understand what you're saying, but you're speaking in generalities. Okay. I want to understand. Like, you almost need to do a budget, because I don't think that this is okay. Look, cards on the table. I don't think that Cape Independence and the Cape Independence Advocacy Group is really about Cape Independence.
Okay.
I think this thing is about pushing the DA as right as it can possibly go. And I think this thing is about creating a coalition with the DA so that you can pull them further and further right.
But what? But you're assuming that I'm far right, which I'm not.
I don't think you're far right. No, let me just say that. I don't think you're a far right or right winger or whatever the case.
I'm a
may be.
centrist.
Well, that's right of me.
Well, okay, yeah,
so
but
it's all relative. So, I don't think that you've done a study into how much it would cost to run an independent state, because possibly for two reasons. One, it's not viable, and two, the real agenda is to get into the polity in a way to sort of like dictate, to almost be the tail that wags the DA dog.
Oh, look, and that's not the case. We genuinely look at, don't get me wrong, 100% genuinely for Cape independence, and you can't cost something that doesn't exist. You can't cost so we can go and look and we can see what it costs to run the military. Let me turn that around. Do you think that the ANC is economically prudent? Do you think the ANC runs the military efficiently?
Well, they're getting there, but no. Obviously, everything that the ANC does can be improved on. I've said this to all my people.
Well, virtually all of the state-owned enterprises which it runs, apart from one, are loss-making. I think
virtually on there are over 200 state-owned enterprises.
Yeah,
we only hear about the most important fuck-ups.
There's about 40, and I think there's one profitable one. There's one profitable state-owned enterprise in the whole country.
No, that's not true.
I think it is, but I'll check.
That's 100% not true.
I read that in a newspaper.
In fact, even Denal made a profit the other day. Even Denal. 390 million.
No.
Yeah.
No. Don't believe it. Okay. Well, let's check that one. We can put it on our list of stuff to do. Cool. I think it was the Daily Investor that had a breakdown of all of the state identity. But I stand in the correction. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Okay. Let's take the point.
Yeah,
let's take.
But effectively, the ANC aren't very good at running things. So if the Western Cape is just as bad as the ANC, then what difference does it make whether the tax money is going to Pretoria and coming back, or it's going straight from here? So even our calculations are based on a cost neutral basis, which means that we don't pay in and we don't get back, and on that calculation we're the same, and then we assume what they call paribus ceteris. Everything else remains the same. In other words, we're no better or worse than the ANC at running all of the things that they run. And on that basis, it's cost neutral. We won't be worse, we'll be better. So you can make that calculation mathematically. And I think to say you're going to be no worse than the ANC is a pretty low bar when it comes to economic management.
Okay, we can agree on that.
Yeah.
So look, from that conversation, it's reinforced my view about this, that there's no real plan to take or even intention for an independent Western Cape, because you've not done the numbers.
But that's not
to satisfy me.
Okay.
You have to understand, if you can win me over, you can win basically the whole country.
But it's not an economic argument. So therefore, what's our focus? So our focus is what?
If it's not an economic argument, what is the argument?
A democratic argument. It's all what I was talking about the whole time. All people have the right to self-determination. A democratic referendum. The will of the Western Cape people. Ideological affinity. It's all about us governing ourselves. And actually, I would still want a Western Cape if we were going to be worse off, because I want to be able to be governed the way that I want to be governed. But it's in this. We're a small organisation. We're not a massive. You saw me turn up here. I didn't turn up here with a cavalcade and thinking. I turned up in my 8-year-old Toyota Corolla and drove myself here. This isn't an organisation that's running on millions and millions. It's running on dedicated people who are really passionate about this. And we have to choose where we allocate our resources, our human resources. And what do? We focus them on the understanding the law. Getting this into the media and getting people talking about it, and we're a political lobby group. That's our primary focus. Now, at this point in time, if the economic numbers was the biggest issue, I would be spending my time on that. But I've not. I've spent today. I'll tell you what I spent my day today. I put together a team of people because we had to put together an Afrikaans translation for the Western Cape People's Bill, and we had 4 people working the whole day trying to get a translation, because we've got to get it for tomorrow to get it tabled by Thursday. And I've worked Well, I started at 5 o'clock this morning. I'll be home at 10 o'clock tonight, and I haven't stopped in between. So you know, and I don't know, any medals for that. This is a labour of love. We do this because we're passionate about it. And whether people agree with us, it doesn't matter. But we're doing this because we think it improves the lives of the people of the Western Cape. And at this side, I've seen enough. I've done the numbers. I understand them. I'm a maths guy. I've had them checked by an economist. They confirmed that I've seen the tax. So I know enough. I don't need to know that you think perhaps it isn't enough to satisfy you, and I accept that. But from my point of view, I've seen enough. I know the Western Cape is viable, and all of the economists that we've spoken to say it's viable. In fact, you go and speak to an economist and find one that will say, well, no, it's not viable. Let's turn that around, as opposed to saying, well, look, because perhaps I just haven't given you the answers that you want. But a Western Cape is economically viable, and we've spoken to lots of economists to be absolutely sure of that, and we're sure of it.
Cool. I think let's leave it there. Phil, Craig, have we got...
I just want to address one thing.
Sure.
Somebody said that, Roscoe, you're losing this conversation. But
okay.
let me just say, at Cape Conscious Media, the idea is not really to win or lose. Sure. The idea is to create a long form where everybody can have their say and shake hands afterwards. The idea is for the listener to view in, and he make his own decision, or she must make her own decision as to who they do you agree with it, whatever. So that's the idea, because I think mainstream media have hypnotized people to say, no, it's a WWE match. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And my last thing that I would just want to say, all my people of color, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. But what I ask you to is, do not be fooled by people that say non-racial. Let them explain to you what they're going to do for you personally, or where you come from personally, and how they're going to address whatever problem that you have, and not just a blanket statement for everybody, because it doesn't work. That's all I have to say.
I'm trying to find this person who said I'm losing.
Well, we've had a good discussion.
I enjoyed it actually.
Phil, thank you so much for coming in. Jack, wherever you are, thanks for coming in. Nantle, thank you, man. And we're going to see you, I think, next Monday. Let's see what happens. Cool. Thank you very much. We out.